Well, to introduce you, thank you, Jeff, so much for joining me here. Could you start off by introducing yourself and kind of
Okay,
your role? And
sure. Well, my name's Jeff Shellito, and I have been a longtime resident of Northern California. And at the time of the Yuba River legislation, I was working for a state senator in Sacramento who was had been chairman of the Assembly Natural Resources Committee, and I was committee staff for him there when he authored some legislation to add to the state's Wild and Scenic River system in 1986 and 89. There was a study that looked into the adding the McCloud River, East Carson, and West Walker to the state system. There had not been an addition to the system since it was enacted in 1972 by former Senator Peter Bear, who I happened to work as a intern or a Senate fellow for. So Byron Sher was from Palo Alto. He had been the mayor of Palo Alto. He was a Stanford law professor. Served in the assembly I joined his staff on the committee in 1985, and in 1996 he got elected to a four-year term in the state Senate representing the area. And he also authored legislation adding Mill and Deer Creeks to the State Wild and Scenic System. There are two tributaries known for their spring run salmon. They're tributaries of the Sacramento River. So in the 1980, I think in the early 80s, my wife and I became involved in whitewater boating. There was something called the River City Whitewater Club that Roger Hicks and his wife were involved with. So we got to know him initially through the whitewater boating circles. And so I knew him for a number of years while it was concurrently with working in the legislature. So anyway, that's about, I give you my background on that. And Roger had been working on trying to get the Yuba, South Yuba in the state system. There were some early attempts years before 1999 that didn't get much traction. They date back to when Byron was in the assembly. So I think it all changed in the election in 96, or no, 90, when was that? 98, when Elizabeth Martin got elected to the Nevada County Board of Supervisors, and I think she may have been a write-in candidate, but it completely shifted the politics for the community because people that supported, I think that were more progressive, became the majority on the County Board of Supervisors, and I believe she was actually elected by her peers to be the chair.
yeah,
So in January of 1999, Elizabeth and Roger and John Regan came to our office in the Capitol and proposed or requested that Byron Sher, carry legislation to designate the Yuba, South Yuba, from its headwaters by Donner Pass, I think, I can't remember exactly, below Englebright, to be added to the state system. So there were that's what started the whole campaign, at least in what we're talking about
right.
today.
As it sort of, by the time it sort of landed on your proverbial desk.
Right, and it was, there was some trepidation from the perspective of my boss and myself, because the area was represented at the time by two Republican legislators, Senator Tim Leslie and Assembly Member Sam Anistad, who I think was a dentist. And they were, I believe Circle talked to them too, at least gave them the courtesy.
Yeah.
But they didn't want to do it, and so that's what precipitated them talking to Byron Sher, who didn't at the time represent the area.
Right. Right. So I love that connection to whitewater paddling. That's a lot of what brought me to the area here. Do you think that your connection to sort of rivers and that that whitewater community that is prominent in river community up here, do you think that helped kind of build that sort of Nevada City, South Yuba River community and take it to Sacramento, your attachment to that world?
Absolutely. And there were other key people involved as well, like Allison Harvey, who was the chief of staff for the Senate Majority Leader, John Burton. And she's a very longtime friend of mine. And having her, personally involved and supportive. And she had previously worked for Phil Eisenberg, who was the assembly member from Sacramento. And he was retired, but he was lobbying and agreed to represent the county in this campaign pro bono.
Yeah.
So there were some key players that definitely were helpful because it was fraught because except for the Nevada County supervisors, there was a lot of opposition, including the local water district, Yuba County Water Agency. So having the county officially support the sponsor, actually, along with Circle, was definitely helpful.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm curious if you could tell me a little bit about the, sort of the fight and the process to get it across the finish line. We've heard a lot from, some of those, John and those people, but what does that look like,
Well, we had to
Sacramento?
talk about, writing a piece of legislation, which I had done previously on these other rivers, and I was staffing bills. I had been staffing bills for Sher since I started to work for him in 1985, and one of the things that was done in those earlier bills was there was a process for enacting a bill requesting the Resources Agency or Resources Secretary to study the feasibility of adding a river to the system, and it allowed for a vetting of the issues to be kind of worked out ahead of time. But this was something that Circle, they figured they had a very limited window of opportunity. And so we just wrote a flat out piece of legislation to add the river to the state system, which is fundamentally a permanent prohibition on new dams and diversions, unlike the federal law, which has other land use ramifications. So I wrote a bill and for my boss, and he introduced it in the state Senate at that point. So it had to go through some committee hearings and a floor vote, and it had to go over the other house. And so once you've introduced the bill, there's deadlines that start to determine. You have a schedule to get bills through committees and get to a floor vote, and to get to the finish line by the end of, I think it was the middle of September that year. And it kind of dictates, hearings and when you got to line up votes. And it triggered a fair amount of advocacy being ramped up by Circle, and lobbying visits and lining up endorsements. And, Izzy got a resolution from the Nevada County supervisors, and there were other resolutions from NGOs and organizations from the community supporting the bill. And I think that made a big difference because it showed that there was tremendous support in the community, and there was definitely opposition, fundamentally by the Yuba County Water Agency, other ag and water interests, and so having the county Board of Supervisors be the sponsor was, helpful in negating that and showing there was tremendous support. But there was, it was a remarkable achievement the way the county and the way the NGO in the community rallied around this effort. And so when we had like a first hearing in Senate Natural Resources, they even lobbied this chair at the time, who was Tom Hayden. So they lobbied individual members of the committee. There were letters written, personal visits. Elizabeth and John made countless trips to Sacramento. I mean, it was just a remarkable effort by them. With this was pre-internet, doing it online through email. This was pressing the flesh,
Right.
Delivering packets of information, meeting with members of the committees, and this is what was different, that it was kind of pre-social media.
Right.
So they had to do their own kind of what was, getting endorsements from local newspapers. I think they got endorsements from statewide papers like the San Francisco Chronicle and the Sacramento Bee, and from people. I had a letter from Yvonne Chenard from Patagonia, other luminaries like that. Right. So it was a lot different then. And I think John and his friend Sean Garvey, they did weekly updates, a program on, I think, Saturday mornings for KVMR.
Yep.
And and then when there were key hearings, they would do live broadcasts, like the floor vote in the Assembly, right, or in the Senate and the Assembly. So it was just, it was kind of a magical time. But I also think it was, the stars were aligned, but also people decided, like Izzy, to make an all-out push.
Right.
And so did Circle. And but having the Senate leaders, chief of staff involved, certainly helped tremendously.
Yeah.
And I mean, as Izzy made, she made a lot of sacrifices to carry through with that lobbying effort.
Yeah.
And so did John. I think John at that point was had moved recently here, along with Sean. So I think it helped him. I think for John, it helped him make his permanent home here.
Yeah.
He's got married and has a family.
Yeah.
So I just remember. I remember when they were broadcasting hearings, and they told me that it was, all the shops in downtown Nevada City, the radios were on, and they could hear the discussion. And I might, as an aside, I at the time I was working in the Capitol, we could monitor committee hearings and floor votes, along with being there in person. Right. There was closed circuit TV, and I had a little TV that had an old-fashioned VHS cassette. And I think I may have some of the hearings, which were, there was one or two in particular that I'll have to dig out.
If you have a way
to play back a VHS cassette, that was the,
we will find a way.
That was the coin of the realm.
Yeah.
But there may be audio recordings at KVMR. I don't know. Or maybe,
yeah. We're hoping. We're not necessarily optimistic.
But having now been involved with other advocacy efforts, like with South Yuba, with the Sierra, with Tom Moore's organization, Sierra Watch, it was a remarkable advocacy effort, because previously, the year before, I had worked on this Headwaters deal to buy the last remaining biggest grove of ancient redwood in the North Coast. And it was very controversial because there was a very motivated, grassroots effort by forest protesters, and
Yeah.
there was a lot of division about buying this land from Charles Hurwitz versus getting it through some kind of litigation. And so the hearings were very contentious. The votes were contentious. There was civil disobedience,
Yeah.
and this was just a very, unlike other major pieces of legislation like dealing with climate change. This was, it wasn't controversial. It was sort of a very, in some ways, simple. Do you want to preserve the Yuba River for future generations and keep dams off of it? So it was kind of it was an either or choice. So it didn't have all the controversy and like other environmental, But I also think there's a difference that, like David Brower and other people did, where they stopped a dam and from flooding the Green River in Echo Park and Dinosaur Monument, and trying to stop the Glen Canyon, but not being entirely successful. There's something about a place that inspires people more than other environmental issues, because it's something you can physically relate to.
Right.
And
you can see it.
right, and whitewater boating or kayaking on the South Yuba is very technical.
It is,
And
it's hard to get people out there that don't know what
right,
they're
it's
doing.
not like there are sections of the Yuba that are boated or kayaked and paddle boated, but there's a love of the river and a place that really motivates people.
Yeah.
And that's, you saw that in the early writings of John Muir and David Brower, who's, if you look at the, Sierra Club routes up all those technical peaks in the Eastern Sierra, he's the one that first climbed those. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that's the connection. And, I was and I still am friends with Mark Dubois, who wanted to stop the New Melones Dam on Stanislaus, and chained himself to a rock to stop the dam from being filled. So, I think what it proves, it's hard to, the process normally for getting a place protected by the Congress or the legislature is, it's difficult politically. And the process is made that way somewhat deliberately, so that a lot of harebrained things can't slip through. But it means it's easier for people opposed to stop something than get it passed. So it just makes the victories more sweet. I mean, my experience has been in the legislature that you lose a lot more often than you win.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. So one of the things that is, part of, this story, and I'm curious when it came in for you, was the non-dam flood control funding in the bond. I think it was Prop 13. That was kind of, to the extent that all politics is negotiation.
Right.
That was the give. When did
Right.
that kind of show up?
The main narrative that the Yuba County Water Agency, even though they were going to lose their ability, they thought, to enlarge some existing reservoirs, and they used the argument that it was that these projects were needed for flood control, and but the benefits for flood control were dubious. And it was mostly about, they sell a lot of water, but they're selling water that's, goes through the delta.
Oh, yeah.
But that was a way to, it was kind of at the end of the process that adding some money with a specific carve out for the Yuba County Water Agency for flood control, kind of, I don't know that actually resulted in the Yuba County Water Agency dropping its opposition, but it became kind of like, at least in terms of that issue,
Right.
Put it to rest.
Yeah.
And so it gave some comfort probably to moderate Democrats who were not familiar with it, but all they heard about was, this would stop the ability to do flood control that would be damaging to the downstream interests. So it was added in a separate bill, kind of late in the process, and it was part of the reason it was put in another bill is that if you amend a bill that originates in the Senate, if it's amended in the Assembly, even if it passes the Assembly, it has to come back to the Senate for another vote. It's called concurrence.
Yeah.
They just went through some of that with this fixing the federal shutdown, and that would have given the opposition another shot at killing the legislation.
Right.
So when it came up for a vote on the Assembly floor, even though its provisions were made contingent on this bond act being put on the ballot, once it was voted on, got 41 votes, they closed the roll, tallied the vote, and the gavel came down, and the celebration there's some urban legends about what happened. Because, it couldn't be stopped. And the other important thing was the voter approval of that bond act. The Yuba River, the operative date of the Wild and Scenic provisions were postponed a year.
Yes.
So this is why we're at the 25.
Right, exactly. A year after the
But
pass.
it wasn't, passage of the bond was not, the operative date of that Wild and Scenic protection for the Yuba was not contingent on the passage of that.
Right. It was a little bit more of the...
But it did pass. But
it did, yeah.
The voters generally approved those things. So.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was all factored into, we were having to constantly deal with the opposition arguments and how to address them. My boss had to be able to respond to those things in floor debates or in a committee hearing.
Yeah, especially with the recent flooding that had happened. I mean, that was very much in the
Well, 86 was a big year where,
97, I think it was also a big year.
Right. Well, I live like 2 blocks from the Sacramento River in Sacramento, and they didn't start releasing water out of Folsom in that February. It was a big Pineapple Express, and they were, anyway, there was some danger of flooding. Carmichael and other, so flooding we've been lucky.
Yeah, yeah. So talk a little bit about that win. I mean, I know for Circle and the people there, it was a huge celebration. Surely you must have felt some of that as well, and perhaps been there with the nice bottles of whiskey.
You heard about
floating around those offices. Yeah.
No, I had bet another committee consultant something on another bill wouldn't pass, and I can't remember. Somehow I ended up with the Balvenie that we were saving for some other reason, but we broke into it, and other people were. It became like. Go to Shellito's office, their Balveni's flowing freely. And Sean was up here and, sending us faxes and so on because they listened to the debate on the floor. But we had to flood. This is when Gray Davis was governor. And he had, once the bill got on his desk in mid-September, he had 30 days to sign or veto, or if he doesn't sign or veto, it becomes law without his signature. So we didn't really know until middle of October that he quietly signed it.
Kind of made you sweat it a little bit.
Well, and then, he got recalled in, I think, fall of 2003. So it was good that and I also think, I would fact check this, but I think Izzy's term as supervisor was 1 term, because I think the word was that the Sierra Pacific Industries, which is the big timber landowner, the biggest landowner in the state, they targeted her. And so I think I don't know if the whole county board flipped, but she lost her reelection.
Yeah, lost her seat there. Yeah, when it's funny, this, whatever, also an aside, but you were talking about the old growth protection, and I grew up in Northern California, and like, Julia Butterfly and her tree sitting, and I have very clear memories of, being knee high with my dad at the lumber yard talking about spotted owls, and,
Yes.
that is one of those early memories of
I have
fierce debate.
I developed a sort of a friendship. It was a lot harder because the Democrats were representing the North Coast, like Mike Thompson, who was a state senator, and he's now in Congress, and Dan Hauser and others. I think on this issue, on the headwaters, they were more sympathetic to what. Well, that was a deal that had been hatched by the Clinton administration with Dianne Feinstein and Pete Wilson, and who was governor then, and the North Coast environmentalists were not. They thought, it should. Anyway, the tree sit. All this stuff happened, and I have nice notes from Julia. And at one point, she called me because I was on the verge of being fired because it was the same kind of dynamic that the North Coast legislators didn't like Byron and Sher involved in their turf.
Right.
And they, but we were intimately involved in that, and to this day, there's some people that think that the state and the federal government shouldn't have paid for that.
Yeah.
But so at one point I don't know how they had, the cell phones were not ubiquitous back then, but she called me and they said, Jeff, you have a phone call, line 3. So, but she had a support structure.
Yes. Oh, yeah. She definitely. Yeah.
But there are. I don't know if we're taping now, but I mean, there's a great novel that kind of picked up on that. It was called Overstory. That I don't think they made. I think the rumor was it's being made into some kind of series in Netflix or
everything. Everything is being done by Netflix.
But Overstory kind of covers that whole period.
Yeah.
But fictionally.
Right.
But there have been other books written about it, and the most recent was written by Greg King, and I don't think there's. It's interesting because when you live through a period where there was a lot of history and people write about it, you realize that becomes the narrative of what happened. And I go, well, that didn't happen. And
right.
That's good that you're doing this because we're the link to I'm gray-haired and in my early 70s, and I was 25 years ago.
Right.
So, it's good that you're getting to us while we're still alive and kicking.
Well, and again, a brilliant segue. Thank you. So, when you think about Wild and Scenic 25 years later, what do you think it means, for the river in this community? And then the second question, or the follow-up question there is, do you think the playbook is the same? If you were going to start today,
No, I think everything has greatly changed. There are still, one of the bills that I'd worked on early for the first additions to Wild and Scenic was to add the McCloud River to the state system. And it's a tributary to, drains into the Lake Shasta.
Yeah.
And there are active moves still going on in the first Trump administration to enlarge the dam and flood the McCloud. And there's still concern that this is going to happen under his second administration. And so nothing is ever, it just takes a majority vote of we have the state protection, but if the federal law could preempt that.
Right.
And that was also a key concession that Circle had to agree to, that it wouldn't, there had been a provision in the law that if the state petitions the Interior Secretary to add the state wild and scenic rivers to the federal system, it can be done by an act of the secretary. And that was done to add some of the North Coast rivers in the wake of the 72 legislation. But there's a provision in the Yuba River bill that they promised they wouldn't do that in the case. So it just, you know, it's the fact that there's that history here and the love for the river just makes it unlikely, I think, politically, that it will be taken out of the system.
Yeah, I have a hard time imagining any kind of
Well,
shift locally.
you know, nothing's, and, you know, I think it was Brower that said something like, you know, the victories are temporary and the defeats are permanent. If you look at what happened with Glen Canyon
Right.
or New Melones.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why, you know, it takes vigilance.
Yeah, you have to.
Ongoing. It's good that you guys are still up here and a solid part of the community.
Yeah, it's a great community to be a part of, and it's
Right.
certainly
Right.
we feel very protective of that stretch of river and you know everything that's.
But
coming
you know, you achieved the Holy Grail. So, like, what do you do next?
We've got plenty going on. We're restoring the
good.
entire watershed, forests to faucets, and
Right. Well, I wish the Truckee River Watershed Council would be more proactive. I was going to say, after Sher termed out in 2004, I worked for 5 years with Caltrout. I was their lobbyist in Sacramento, and you know, they do both advocacy as well as you know, projects they used to call rock rolling.
yeah.
But they're not exclusively one or the other.
Yep, that is.
But I think the Truckee Watershed Council could, you know, they're mostly into rock rolling, which
Yeah.
I'm not diminishing it, but it takes advocacy to do things like the Yuba River Wild and Scenic.
Yeah, and that's certainly you know we try to work in both of those spaces as well. Where we plenty of rock rolling.
Yeah, but they sometimes get in competition because
Right.
of obtaining grant money.
Yeah, it's a fine line to walk. You've got
Right. Well, I think that's part of the reason Elizabeth started the Sierra Fund with an infusion of some, you know, an endowment money.
Yeah.
And, you know, and that's transitioned to a different entity
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Right.
Also great entity. Well, thank you
Sure.
so much. You know, that's sort of kind of more or less run through all of the questions or prompts narrative we've got. I mean, if there's other stuff that you're interested in saying, or you know, rescue your wife.
Well,
from the car.
I do think, you know, I hope the community appreciates how much effort this took on the part of some key people like Elizabeth and John.
Yeah.
And for that matter, Allison Harvey, that, you know, I've been down the Grand Canyon with her like 2 times, and, you know, with her and her husband, our private trips we've done. And so we have you know, there's a connection there where when we got some other things done in other arenas, like suction dredge mining is basically banned.
Yeah.
You know about that?
Yeah.
Which is important. And I think Izzy was involved in that too.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you guys are still here, and I'm glad I'm doing this because it's part of your legacy.
Yeah, it's huge, and it's part of the community legacy. And you know, to your point, like one of the reasons I think there are a lot of reasons, but part of it is that I think there is some disconnect, especially as you know, people, you know, always moving, but you know, like Truckee in so many places, we've seen a lot of people, and myself being one of them, moving to this area that don't have that connection that this is a river and not a lake.
Right.
And it could have been a lake or a couple of lakes.
Right. Right.
And telling that story, because there are important stories. And it is an important story in terms of mobilizing a community and protecting what we have, but also as we think about the future, those lessons, you know, need to be heard, and those stories need to be told and retold so that we continue to pay attention.
Well, we know what, you know, happened to New Melones. That was my first exposure. I mean, I worked and we, before the dam, while the dam was being constructed, and I got to know all these places in there that are, it's buried, and when there's low water, some of the, there's a bathtub ring, and you can see, and then, Glen Canyon's was buried, and
Yeah.
so when you know those things can happen, that's why it's an added incentive to work, be diligent to. But I think it was also the wisdom of striking when the iron is hot, and Elizabeth and Circle did that.
Yeah.
Like in January of '99.
Yeah. Seeing your moment and saying, "This is it."
No, this is like we have the best. We got all these things lined up. Let's go for it.
Yeah.
All right. So.
Timing is important for sure.
Right. Okay. Well,
All
I've
right.
held forth for long enough. Maybe I don't know. It gave me an opportunity. I mean, they Circle had regular fundraisers during that campaign too.
Oh yeah.
Which is how I had an opportunity to meet Gary Snyder, which I really treasured because, I'm been a longtime fan.
Yeah.
And are you familiar with any of his writing? You're familiar with him?
Yeah.
You familiar with the Jack Kerouac novel Dharma Bums?
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
Okay, where they climb the Matterhorn outside
Yeah.
Bridgeport, and which inspired me to do that in '78, by myself. So I got a chance to talk to him about, about that and other things. So he must be 95. I mean, my Byron Sher lives in Pollock. Oh, he and his wife bought a apple orchard in east of Placerville, and he's like 95 now. So
Yeah.
I'll let him and his family know.
Yeah.
We had this conversation and this is happening. So
Yeah, please do. And if he's motivated, like I sort of said at the beginning, right? We're trying to do, push. There'll be clippets and snips and something near term, but I am more and more convinced that something longer format,
Oh, okay.
it is inevitable, and so it's quite likely that at some point you'll get a call from somebody that's actually professional working on a film with us.
right. Well, you can
but-
do some like social media clips, right?
Yeah, it's going to be certainly
Yeah.
that kind of thing
Right.
near term.
It'll
but,
it'll evolve that way. Okay.
Yes.
Got to turn that off.